Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. I cost the company time, money, and a lot of explaining to clients why their employee got arrested. The second story. Poor management makes me set an ambulance on fire in full view of the EMS community. The third story. D-head paying 3 times the cost of the bottle. The first story is, manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at an alarm. Sure thing. So, a little story from years ago about an assistant manager that doesn't understand the work at all. I worked as a security guard driving around industrial areas and responding to alarms that go off at the buildings from our clients. When I started there, I was told/learned to ask for proper ID, driving license, passport, ID card. If I encounter someone in the building, which was very common, as most alarms came from people not turning off the alarm in time or entering the wrong code, and note their details in the report. But, and this will be important later on, if they can't show ID, kindly request them to leave and close the building. If they refuse, call police to deal with it. Some background to make things clearer. Laws here make it so that security guards are just civilians, which means I can ask for ID, but if they refuse to give it, there's nothing I can do. Only law enforcement officers can demand IDs. Also, my assistant manager hates me for some reason. So for a few years I do this as I was learned. Ask for ID if I found someone in the building, and ask them to leave if they refused or didn't have one with them. Some would show credit cards or other things with their name on it. Then I would write it in my report, but still ask them to leave. All this time, the assistant manager would go over these reports in the morning, but I never heard any complaint about it, so I was doing stuff right, I thought. After a few years on this particular day, I get an alarm, so I drove there. I arrive at the building, go in and find the cleaning lady doing her job. The alarm system log shows she entered the wrong code the first time and was just a little too late entering it correct the second time, as would happen a lot. I kindly ask her for an ID, and she tells me she doesn't have any with her. She shows me a bank card with her name. I write down the name in the report, including it was from a bank card, and tell her she has to leave. She understands, picks up her stuff, and leaves. I finish my report and go on my merry way. The next morning, I receive an email from my assistant manager, going mental over the fact I send the cleaning lady away without noting down proper ID details, and telling me the client is mad because they wanted to know who was in the building. I calmly replied that I did what I always did and was instructed to do when I joined the company, and had been doing without any issue for the last 3 or 4 years. The reply came fast with detailed instructions. If someone doesn't have proper ID on them, you call the police and have them identify the person so you can note it in your report. The assistant manager also made a memo stating this to everyone in the unit, which I, of course, also made a copy of. As the good employee that I am, I followed that instruction to the letter. Most others didn't, as they weren't targeted by the assistant manager, so they could do whatever they wanted. I called the police every time a person couldn't show me proper ID, which happened almost every shift I worked, if not multiple times in a single shift, leading to a few employees of clients actually being arrested for failing to identify to a law enforcement officer. This wasn't my intention at all. Some police officers were jerks and just arrested them, even though they could verify the identity of someone fairly simple on location. The police calling my manager why the hell they were called every single day to go and confirm someone's name because they didn't have ID on them. Multiple clients calling the manager why a simple alarm was taking 3 times longer than usual. Clients have to pay per 15 minutes I'm on site, after the initial 15 minutes have passed, and refusing to pay the extra fee for me waiting for the police to show up. As I expected, I got invited to a talk with my manager and assistant manager to discuss some things. Basically, my manager wanted to chew me out over all these calls he had been getting, let alone people being arrested. The next day, I sit down with my manager and the assistant manager, being very cheerful, as his favorite target was getting a huge reprimand. The manager asks me why I called the police every time someone doesn't have a proper ID, asking me if I have any idea how peeved off the police is, and how many clients are refusing to pay the fee because it takes so much longer now. I have to wait for the police. Basically, I cost the company a lot of money. After the manager has asked these questions, I pull out my folder containing the email conversation with the assistant manager, instructing me to do exactly that, and the copy of the now conveniently disappeared from the office memo with the same instructions, both signed by the assistant manager. The same assistant manager that's now turning pale, realizing what I'm about to hand over to the manager. I calmly explain to the manager while he's reading both papers that I am only following the instructions given to me, as I had clearly been doing it wrong for the last 3 to 4 years prior to this incident. The face of the manager is slowly turning red from anger, while the assistant manager is turning paler by the second. Before the manager explodes, he asks me to go grab a coffee and wait till he calls me back in. They needed to go over these papers and decide what they would do with me. Sure thing, boss. While I'm enjoying my coffee, I can hear my manager go mental to his assistant. Multiple things like, "How can you be so stupid? And they have it on effing paper, you idiot," are clearly heard across the entire floor. When I get called back in, I can see my assistant manager sitting silently, shamefully behind his computer, attempting to avoid any and all eye contact with me. The manager calmly explains to me he wasn't aware of these papers and that I should follow the instructions as all other employees should. Saving face, as admitting this was wrong and changing the instructions would mean defeat of the management, and that he would inform all clients about this so they can avoid these kinds of incidents. I spend the next 9 years following these instructions, which angered the assistant manager as he would read my reports every morning, telling about how the police had to show up again and again for something silly. Eventually, they found a way to get rid of me, reassigning me to a new position, which I gladly accepted, as the work was a lot more fun. I actually became a law enforcement officer with that switch. The pay was better and the hours were even sweeter. The second story is the day I lit an ambulance on fire. Several years ago, I was working as an EMT for a small private ambulance company, which contracted primarily as a transportation service. The ambulance company employed a pair of mechanics that did regular maintenance on each unit and fixed problems when they came up. So the rigs were old, and a lot of the mechanics' spare time went towards restoring the Impala owned by the CEO's son. I wasn't well liked by the owners and management for one reason or another, but I suspect it's because I frequently spoke my mind. This means that I was tasked with the worst trucks on the worst shifts. One day, my partner and I were dispatched to a scheduled patient transfer from a long-term rehabilitation facility to their home. On our way to the facility, our ambulance overheated, and we were forced to pull over. Dispatch was notified and we were told to let them know when the truck cooled, so we could get back to work. An hour later, the truck was still hotter than I'd like, and I let dispatch know that we needed a new unit. Their solution was to have us drive back and swap our gear into a fresh unit to finish our shift. We would need to drive across town to get back to dispatch, so I let them know that it would take a while as we'd need to pull over every time the engine overheated. Little else was discussed and we started back. I figured I'd stick to the smaller side roads and take my time avoiding the freeways for the safety of ourselves and other drivers sharing the road. I should also mention that every ambulance has a GPS reporting system that reports all of our telemetry, so we're tracked every moment of every day. The moment we pass the first entrance to the freeway, the dispatch manager, we'll call her Mary, calls us on the radio and angrily asks us to explain why we're not following instructions. I opted to give her a phone call to settle this and not have a long, drawn-out discussion on the public airwaves. Mary accuses my partner and I of wasting time and milking the situation so we wouldn't have to take our share of calls. Mary goes on saying that our intentions were obvious since we're not taking the freeway, and as such, when we got back to dispatch, we would be dismissed for the remainder of the day without pay, and they would investigate to see if further disciplinary actions would be needed. I tried to let her know that driving on the freeway was unsafe, and I would have to stop more frequently, but she wouldn't hear it and told me to get back as fast as possible. No more delays. Cue malicious compliance. Our patient monitoring equipment is incredibly expensive, and management has stated in the past that if we break it, we're on the hook to replace it. So I tell my partner to pack it all up and put it just inside the door because I wasn't sure what would happen, but chances were good that we'd need to grab it quickly and make a run for it. So as directed, we turn around and head back to the freeway entrance at full speed. I think we made it to the end of the freeway merging lane when the temperature gauge started to redline, and we had another 12 miles to go. The further I drove, the hotter the engine got, and it started to produce white smoke. Lightly at first, then heavier, as we approached the big hill just before our freeway exit. Several cars were passing us and honking their horns to alert us of our peril, but there was no stopping this train. We were filling up the lanes behind us with smoke, and the smell was wretched, but the ambulance was still running. As we made it to the top of the hill, the engine cut out and lost all power. Smoke was pouring out of the sides of the hood, but my vision wasn't compromised, so I coasted it over to the shoulder and got it as far off the road as I could safely manage. Once I threw it into park, flames erupted from the engine. I told my partner to get as much equipment evacuated as she could, and I grabbed the fire extinguisher. As I'm trying to put out the fire, my partner's on the phone letting dispatch know that we were forced to stop because our ambulance was on its way to a fiery death. I guess at this point, our situation had received enough attention that someone had called 911, and the fire department was dispatched, but they pulled up on the opposite side of the freeway, watching to make sure that things didn't spiral out of control. We were sure to let dispatch know that the fire department had also arrived. Shortly after our call, the CEO's son showed up in his Impala to pick up the equipment, as well as myself and my partner. He was on the phone trying to get a flatbed tow truck out as fast as possible, so his smoking ambulance could be removed from public view as quickly as possible. The unit was picked up and towed back to the garage, all while the fire department sat and watched. My partner and I were still sent home for the rest of the day. I celebrated the early start to my weekend with a few drinks, and nothing else ever came of it. That unit was retired and never saw service after that, but the mechanics said they owed me a beer, I guess, because I brought the end of the worst rig in the fleet, and they no longer needed to provide upkeep on it. The last story is, want the whole bottle? You'll get the whole bottle. So this story was from about 8 years ago, so my memory may be a little hazy. So I was 18 male and working in a bar in the town center somewhere in the UK. We're based between two of the grimiest pubs and the clubs in there, so we got a lot of dodgy, rude, and drunk patrons on a regular occurrence. One night at around 12 a.m., this group of guys come in, wearing suits, and I immediately can tell they're pretty drunk and obnoxious. They come to the bar, which was about 2 to 3 deep, around 20 to 30 people waiting ahead of them. They start loudly asking for service, even though there's people patiently waiting in front of them. Me and my team just roll our eyes and get back to serving people. I get round to serving them and they all shout, "Finally! So effing service! What took you so long?" I just ignored that comment and asked what they wanted. They then started talking amongst themselves, like they didn't have enough time to work this out while waiting. The ringleader proclaimed that they're going big tonight, so won a bottle of Grey Goose vodka. I said, "I can only see you a maximum of a double in any one drink. If you want to make it stronger, go for it." He ignores the most of what I said and just says, "Didn't you hear me? 1 bottle of Grey Goose. We can't sell the bottles of spirits under any circumstances." I call the manager up in the back and explain the situation. He says exactly what I've already told the customer, so we agreed that if explained one more time about how I had to give them the drink, and he just said 1 bottle again, I'd do it. What ringleader didn't realize is that I have to put the whole bottle through, as doubles, which was about $8.50 per bottle without any mixers. So this bottle ended up costing him 170 quid, before any mixers, when it's only 35 quid in the local supermarket. He throws his hands up in the air saying I've ripped him off, and he's not gonna pay that. Why didn't I say anything sooner, etc., etc. I said that I did. He just fobs me off and goes to walk out. Little does he know I've already asked the bouncers to keep him in the building till he's paid up. His mates laugh at him as he goes white as a sheet, realizing he's just spent a lot of money. His friends give him a little bit of money to pay help up. Ringleader then spends the night sulking with his 170 bottle of 30 vodka. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.